Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 12 of Hacker Practice, the show where I practice the art of conversation with hackers. Today's brilliant technologist is a good friend of mine. His name is Johnny Boursiquot. Johnny is a leading expert in the cutting-edge programming language called Go. It's an open source project out of Google and was designed to be highly performant. So if you're into the technical discussion, you're really going to enjoy the second half of today's conversation. Now, before Johnny was Mr. GoLang, he was Mr. Ruby Hacker with 5 Vim panels going at a time. I met him when he was teaching Ruby at Launch Academy in Boston and inspiring a devoted little group of acolytes, myself included, many of whom I also assume will be listening to this episode. After Launch Academy, Johnny worked with me at a wearable startup and helped me to build the back-end systems there. He saved my butt out on the job at least half a dozen times, and in the process, we built a really cool piece of technology and software for a really cool startup. In this episode, Johnny and I talk about some of his lessons learned from founding and building a technology agency. We talk about the relative pros and cons of using Ruby versus Go in different domains. We talk about learning a new programming language, how to get started. We talk about serverless application architectures. Johnny gives me a quick primer in that, so really interesting from the technology point of view, also very interesting from the business point of view. It does get more technical about halfway through this conversation, so if you are a non-technical person, maybe you won't find it as interesting, but I do encourage you to slog through it and maybe pick up some of the ideas that we're talking about and do your own research to learn more and potentially make yourself more of a double or triple threat by having a technical skill set. In any case, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Hacker Practice with my friend Johnny Boursiquot. As always, you can find us online at hackerpractice.com, and we do love to hear your feedback. So enjoy today's episode of Hacker Practice with Johnny Boursiquot. Hey, Johnny, how are you doing today?
Not too bad, not too bad.
I know that you just moved out to Maryland. That's actually where I am as well, but we are recording on Skype today. Do you want to tell me about your new situation?
Yeah, after spending a good bit of time in the Boston area, 13 years to be precise, it was time to sort of come back. My family, my sort of extended family is down in the Maryland area near the College Park in the University of Maryland campus. So it was they've been sort of wanting us to come back, my wife and I, and our kids. They sort of kind of be closer to family, and everything I had gone up to Boston to do, I had done. So I had nothing else keeping me up there. So it was time.
Can you tell me about what took you to Boston in the first place?
Yeah, I went up there to start a company with a couple of friends of mine. I actually met those guys back in DC, actually, a number of years back, and we sort of developed a working relationship. And then around the time, they were sort of thinking, okay, it was like 2 of them. They were thinking, okay, we need to sort of go up to Boston, that's where they're from. And start an actual company, like a digital agency type of thing. And I was sort of feeling the entrepreneurial sort of itch. So I was like, you know what, this is something. The timing was good, right? I didn't have kids yet, and my wife and I were sort of still sort of looking for what's next, right? We're young, we're looking at the world as sort of our oyster and saying, hey, like what's the big thing that we're gonna do, right? So for me, it was sort of pretty clear from the very beginning. Okay, I want to create a company. I want to be a technologist working at a company and building a company. So that opportunity came. I embraced it, and it required me to move away from all the family I know and love. But it was something that I sort of needed to do professionally and personally. And did it, and I'm glad I did. It was an incredible learning experience. Spent well over a decade working at that startup and turning into something, that I'm proud to have left behind. It's still going strong, but my time came and went. It was time to return home.
Can you tell me anything that sticks out to you as being like a major lesson that you learned during that time from starting a company?
Oh man, there are so many lessons. the one of the striking ones is really understanding sort of there's a certain type of responsibility that goes along with sort of being a business partner, and sort of running your own company and being a sort of a business owner. Especially once you start sort of bringing employees into the mix, you're really no longer responsible just for yourself, right? It's no longer about what you want to do from a personally and so professionally. It's about, okay, what do you need to do right today or this week or this month to make sure that the bills are paid, that the people who do work for you, that may or may not have families, regardless of what their circumstances are, but they come to work, they come to work for you, and they need to get paid, right? You need to take care of them. You need to pay their health insurance. You need to, make sure that they're happy, at work, that they're doing things that they want to do. So it was a sort of a big sort of life lesson and sort of learning to sort of remove myself from the equation, so to speak, and not sort of saying, hey, it's what kind of technology do I want to play around with today, right? And basically saying, hey, like, we need to actually get this project done. It might not be my favorite, technology to work on or my favorite project to work on, but it's I have within me the power to actually get this project over the hill, or to do something for help another developer work through something, or to face some challenges, as a business, right? Some financial challenges or legal challenges, whatever they may be, right? These things that come along with sort of being an entrepreneur, running your own show. You kind of have these things sort of take a front seat, right? As a technologist, that was a very hard lesson for me to learn. Again, thinking that, okay, well, I'm gonna go start this company, and then I'm gonna get to work on all the cool stuff that I want to work on, right? Thinking that, okay, well, I'm working for an employer now, and they tell me what to do, when to do it, what to do it with. I'm gonna be my own, man. I'm gonna be my own sort of, boss and do what I want. Well, it's not always like that, right? It's the when responsibility comes, it sort of requires you to sort of really take yourself out of the picture and sort of see what does the business need, and what do the people who work at this business and who depend on it, what do they need?
So I want to dive into this a little bit. We didn't. I didn't expect to, but now it seems especially relevant because last year I left an agency. I've taken sort of a mini retirement, and now this podcast is kind of easing back into the working life for me. And I think that the next step is definitely starting an agency. I'm curious, when you started your agency, how many years had you been developing at that
hmm
point? And let's start there.
hmm Well, wow, it's when I look back, it seems like yesterday, but so much time has gone by since that time. I mean, I started my first business back when I was in high school, my senior year of high school. I from the very when I was from the very start, I was kind of sort of I kind of knew that I wanted to sort of be an engineer, be a software developer, and sort of be around technology. So that was sort of a very easy decision for me to make. Sort of the business stuff came into the picture as a means for me to just, most sort of accountants would tell you, hey, you need to sort of, protect yourself from potential, legal matters or whatever it is. Like when you are, especially when you are a consultant, you want to make sure that you have some legal protection, by basically you want to incorporate or set up an LC or whatever it is. So I sort of did that as at a very young age, sort of that kind of thrust me into that whole sort of way of life, if you want to call it that. But it's I started very young, so by the time I actually joined with my partners and actually started that agency, I had both consulting experience from having done it on my own. But I'd also worked for as a day job, for two or three other companies. So I'd had a pretty good sort of breadth of experience when it comes to so what I did for a living. But I don't think anything could have prepared me for sort of jumping in with other folks to sort of build a company that was responsible for other people's livelihoods, right? To hire other people to sort of, bring in specialized skill sets, for specific jobs, and sort of, and also learning how to do business, right? It's one thing to be a technologist, and to know your stuff when it comes to technology. Oh, I know what language to use here. I know what framework to use there. I know infrastructure and ops and all that stuff. I mean, it's one thing to have that sort of knowledge. It's a completely different thing to have sort of the know-how, or even how to go about learning how to have the know-how to sort of do business, right? Because a lot of times you're going to be dealing with sort of people that really have no clue, right? The sort of how the sausage is made, right? They just want a website, or they want an app, or they want some sort of ETL solution, take their data from one state to transfer it to make it look a different way, or whatever it is. They just basically know that, okay, they're gonna hire a professional or a company to do a job for them, and they don't particularly care, right, how that gets done, but they do care about sort of being able to communicate with you. They do care about being able to sort of that you understand exactly what their needs are, even when they themselves can't really articulate it in a way that a technologist would sort of grasp and sort of get right away. So it was. I mean, the technology knowledge, the sort of knowing how to sort of code and get things done was definitely, sort of the my bread and butter. But the how to do business really was something that I had sort of had to learn as on the job, so to speak. It was really one of the things I didn't anticipate, and that sort of caught me by surprise. But I kind of had to learn real quick.
When you say that, do you mean specifically around like sales and marketing? Because it also sounds like there were human resource challenges for you early on.
Oh yeah, it's the
The gauntlet.
the thing about being sort of most technologists or most developers or engineers or UX people will tell you that, okay, they will see something out there and they'll be like, oh, I can make that, I can build that, right? I mean, Facebook is nothing more than like its basic, most basic, just doing CRUD operations against a database, and then rendering on the screen, and maybe you might even have some Ajax or whatever, asynchronous JavaScript, making some calls behind the scenes and just populating the page as the user scrolls down or whatever it is. I mean, there's this natural sort of tendency to think as technologists that, oh yeah, you look at something, you look at a website, you look at an app, like, oh, I can build that, right? And you don't realize everything else that goes into making this thing that you're looking at and using a product, right? I mean, being able to code and build something is a small, it is a small portion, right, of the big picture of actually running a company, or having a product that you sell. You need sales, you need marketing, you need analytics to know whether something is working or not. You need user feedback, you need QA, there's a whole lot that goes beyond just being able to sit down and write some code. It's part of it for sure. It's a critical part of it, right? Without that, you don't get a product. But I mean, it is something that we technologists tend to take for granted, right? You need an entire team of specialized skill set around something to truly make it, like a viable business.
Were there any turning points for you in terms of a learning curve where you felt like, oh, this one thing that I didn't know before, I've now learned, and because I've learned this one thing, it's made me so much more effective at my job? Is there anything in particular that strikes you as being more useful than anything else you learned in your time there?
Yeah, so I think my if I had to boil it down to just one takeaway, it would be understanding the difference between a service business and a product business.
Mm.
When we started our agency, effectively we were sort of banking on our own sort of skills, right? Our ability to sort of execute and deliver on any one project, right? So I was sort of responsible for coding backends and building databases and sort of integrating with other systems and building APIs and all that stuff. And we had other team members who were strong on the UX side. We had other team members who were sort of strong on sort of IT related, sort of networking, sort of technology and whatnot. So we were each sort of thinking, okay, well, we individually we can do all these things, right? Put together, we can have a business that sort of covers, right, these types of projects. But then what we never actually stopped and thought about was that, okay, if you're doing that, right, that means like if one of us, or if none of us is actually sort of working on a project, money is not coming in, right? When you're a service business, if you don't work, you don't eat, right? Whereby when you're a product business, right, even though the upfront investment into building a product might be long, right, and some companies don't even make it out of the product development phase, they just run out of money. But if you can actually get through that phase of development and be smart enough by getting feedback early on and make sure you're building the right thing, getting what the business calls product market fit, right? Like if you get through that phase and you get something out there, then if it's if you sort of have a paid model whereby I have to come in, I see the value of what you're selling, and I'm willing to pay for it right there and get a copy of the software, then it's a model that allows you to sort of scale, right? It's a model that allows you to basically say, okay, I now have something I can sell, right? Yeah, sure, there's going to be product updates that I need to have. There's going to need to be maintenance. Users might report issues, but I have something, right? I have a starting point. Now I can put marketing dollars behind it. I can put sales, behind it. I can do sort of a outreach, right, for that one thing I already have, and try to get it into more people's hands. You can scale that, right? You can sell that over and over and over again without having to work for every single dollar coming in. So knowing the difference between a service business and a product business was sort of a huge sort of eye opener for me, because we spent years and years and years trying to build basically an agency that effectively was sort of a powerhouse for service delivery, right? Basically, people come to us and say, okay, I want a website for this particular conference, or I want an application that integrates with this backend, and these things were short-lived or so custom that we couldn't resell them to any other customer, right? And then we kept basically doing that over and over and over again, not realizing, okay, at some point, right, we have to actually come up with something that we can actually resell, that we own, that we can resell and actually generate revenue from that, as opposed to having to, work, like night and day for delivering these custom, one-time use sort of solutions to customers. I mean, we were great at what we did, but really we sort of needed to make a shift into thinking, as sort of workers, right, and thinking more as sort of, entrepreneurs, as more as sort of people who are in business to build something and then ideally be able to move on from it, right? So not just being basically doing the same thing over and over and over again till, God knows when, right?
So I think this is a problem that a lot of agencies get into. They start a company, they realize on some level that they are just providing a service, but they have this anticipation that the technology that they build will be reusable in some sense. And that actually never really happens for a lot
No.
of these companies. I don't know why that is. And the other thing that I see a lot is that they say, oh, well, we're going to do internal product development, and
Mhm.
we're going to test ideas as we go. And that also very, very rarely happens.
Well, the reason why it happens, and we fell into the sort of the same trap as well, it is because unless you have, so you think about it this way, right? Your revenue, right, is still based on the services that you provide, the services that your employees and yourself are working to provide. Well, when you have to work to deliver, right, on a contract, on something you've committed to delivering to a customer by a set deadline, um, that actually takes away from any, so that takes priority over any sort of internal development you might want to do, right? Because guess what? That product development, that internal development that you tell yourself that you're going to do, well, guess what's paying for that? It is the service, right? The revenue you're getting from the service business, right? That's what's paying for that. And it's always going to take priority because we need to actually deliver the service to get paid. And sometimes when you have an agency working with, other agencies or larger companies, these companies tend to have, net 30, well, net 30 would be great, but, they're doing net 16, net 90. We've even dealt with companies that are paying you like 120 days later after you've delivered something, right? So now you imagine that you had to constantly be working, right, on every project you can find, right, to be able to get in a stream of revenue in, right? That way you can cover your bills, you can cover payroll, you can cover benefits, you can cover like all the sort of incidentals that sort of go along with sort of running a business. You're constantly looking for where the next dollar is coming from, right? So you find yourself in this trap whereby you'd really love to have a product you can sell so you can get out of this sort of loop. But then you find out, okay, crap, the moment I need to, sort of put down the service work to go do product development, right? You have this unease, right? Because the service work needs to get done in order to bring dollars in. But then if you happen to be lucky enough to get, a stockpile of cash around that you can actually, throw at product development, well, guess what? Now you have to pull staff, right? It's the same staff that needs to be doing both the service work and the product work, right? Now you have to pull that staff, right, from whatever they might be working on, right? Because you can't just have one person working on it, right? You need all the different disciplines, right, that goes into product development. So you have to pull these people from whatever they're working on, right, or getting parts of their time, right, slicing and dicing their time so that you can find pockets, right, that you can actually bring him on to do a particular aspect of the project. Well, guess what? Product development that's a horrible way to actually build a product, right? I mean, there are tons of books and best practices that have come out, within the last, 10, 15 years about how you do product development well. And this model, certainly, of just pulling people for a couple of hours or a day or two here and there to try and put on product development, that just doesn't work. That's why agencies are always going to have this problem, this sort of problematic way of approaching product development, unless they can actually get investment from somewhere, or get enough cash, put away, and build a team around product development, right? Have a department who's in charge of actually building a product, and leave them alone, right? Don't pull them, don't distract them, just leave them alone. If you're really serious about building a product, let them build a product, right? And then resign yourself to say, okay, I have both a service capability with these people, and I have a product development that's ongoing with these people. That's the only way you can do that. Trying to make the two work with the same exact resources, same exact people, same exact revenue, that's a recipe for disaster, and it doesn't work.
So you made this realization that there's a big difference between service and product companies. Do you wish, or did you realize along the way that there is some kind of happy medium? It sounds like you're saying save up your money, then invest in product. Did you do that, or do you wish you did, or is there some kind of, if you could go back in time and sort of set up like an action plan for yourself, what would that look like?
Well, I mean, hindsight's always 2020, right? So it's one of those things where knowing what I know now, I would have probably sought investment. Like I would have basically been sort of at least a proponent for, hey, let's make an actual, let's come up with an idea for a product, right, and go get funding for that, like as its own thing, right? Like almost like starting a different company, right? And then having sort of the leadership team of the existing company sort of maybe be on the board or be advisors or in some way be tied to this new venture, but really treating it as its own thing, right? And who knows? Maybe a large portion of sort of the funding and initial funding, the seed capital, if you will, for this new venture would come from the agency itself. If it happens to have some cash sort of laying around, but definitely seeking sort of investment from others. Like most startups do these days, right? So they'll go to an incubator, or they'll go to friends and family, and they'll go to angels. They'll find the money, right, somewhere. They will not sort of tell themselves that, oh yeah, I'm going to be consulting nights and weekends while I try to build a product during the day. You might do that, but you do that with a sort of a very sort of finite like amount of time like allocated for that, because you can't sustain it forever. And I think one of the things that I wish I had done sort of back when I was actively in the agency world was really to sort of create an opportunity for investors to like invest into an actual product idea, as opposed to sort of trying to do it from within the agency world itself.
So let me ask from the flip side, which is, let's say you were starting an agency again, and in this situation, you know the difference, right? You know that there's product companies and you know that there are service companies, but you are starting an agency committed to providing service to a market, and just because that's what you want to do, right? You just believe in this. It's okay. I'm going to get on this treadmill, and that's fine because it's what I want to do. I just want to be in service to other companies, and that's it. If you were going to do that, I'm curious, like, what is the smart margin that you would build into contracts? And is there anything else that you would really focus on if you knew that, okay, there's no product here to build except for the products that our clients want us to build?
You obviously, when you're trying to set up your contracts, I mean, obviously, if you can get away with, a sizable margin, you definitely want to do that, because what typically happens is that the customer comes to you, they sort of lay out a set of requirements, or you work with them to come up with a set of requirements and what they're gonna need. Oh, and by the way, like, dealing with when you're in the service world, even though you might try to sort of deal with things from an agile standpoint, right, as we sort of tend to hear a lot about, in product development, in the services world, it's a nice idea, but it never quite works out that way, right? So you might still be developing software for a customer, but guess what? The whole notion of, okay, I'm gonna have a sprint, I'm gonna sort of pick these things to sort of work on, and then I'm gonna deliver that and get the customer feedback. Sort of that the traditional sort of agile sort of cycle, right, of 2-week development cycle or 2-week sprints or however whatever length of time you want to have your sprints be. That whole model of sort of product development doesn't always sort of carry over one-to-one for service sort of offering, for service delivery, right? Because what happens is that the customer comes to you, just like in the product development sort of style. The customer comes to you, they think they know something, right? They will tell you, okay, and again, this is not to take anything away from them. They know from a business standpoint exactly what they want, right? They have a vision. They have some things that they're trying to get done. They know the what, they don't know the how, right? And that's where you come in as a professional. But the trick is that, especially in a service business, typically they'll come to you because they're trying to meet a specific deadline. So let's say, for example, the sort of the sector that I used to deal with, as an agency, which is sort of marketing. So marketing typically has, a specific budget that they're working with. They typically have some sort of event, some sort of milestone they're trying to work towards. Maybe they have a product launch, at their own company. Maybe they have some sort of event going on, like a conference they're trying to, a trade show they're trying to get to. So they want some collateral. They want some things they can hand out. They want an application that they can sort of put on the App Store. They want a website for users to visit to get more information. They want stuff. They want wares, right? So they come to you as the agency and then they say, hey, we want we want these things, right? They know, right? They have an idea in their heads of what they want, and they'll outline these things to you. And then your job as an agency is to tease out, right, the sort of the specifics of that, because there's nothing more subjective, right, in the world of application development than sort of working with a marketing agency, whereby those people too, they know when they have something, they know what they want when they actually see it. So now that means you could have several iterations where you're just trying to come up, right? We're just trying to nail down the idea that they have in their heads that they can't exactly articulate to you, but you have to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. If you want to call that a sprint, if you want to call that agile, you can label it that, but guess what? All that work that's going on, chances are you haven't accounted for it, right, in your margin, right? So say you start out with a 30% margin on the contract. Guess what? As you go back and forth, that you're starting to erode that margin, right? So by the end of the day, you're hoping that you at least broke even, so that and then hopefully, right, when that check comes through, right, after the project is done, 60 days or 90 days or 120 days, when that check finally comes in, right, you're covering your costs, right? So being in the agency world is brutal. It is a very, very brutal sort of world to be in for that reason, because you're not in control of your own product roadmap. You're not in control of that, right? The customer coming in is telling you what they want, and oftentimes they don't know exactly what it is that they want until they see it, and you have to sort of bear that cost.
So is there anything that you've learned, any processes or that you've learned to mitigate that? Maybe, we're talking about, this sounds like an agile design sprint almost, what you were
Mm-hmm.
describing with trying to figure out what exactly the idea is. But is there any other process or technique that you really learned to kind of reduce the risk of not breaking even?
The the thing I think works best, or the practice I think works best, is that if you can establish some sort of a relationship, a partnership really with your customer, right? Meaning that maybe you have an MSA, a Master Services Agreement, right, with that customer, that if in effect guarantees that you would at least be looked at first, right, or second or third, or whatever you sort of negotiate, right, for any future work that comes in the door, right? So the ideal scenario is one where you are an agency that has an agreement with a company, ideally a large one where there's a lot of sort of different departments that need different work being provided by agencies. Ideally, you are in a small pool, right, of vendors that company's sort of departments are allowed to go out to get work done, right? So if you are one of three, maybe that guarantees that you're gonna get a minimum amount, minimum quantity of new projects, that are sort of that need to be sort of delivered, right? So imagine if you have a marketing department, an IT department, a human services department, and so on and so forth. Each of these departments within that company may need, right, services that you as an agency offer, right? I can remember cases where we worked for a large sort of chain of hotel, very well-known hotel, a hotel chain, and they had different departments that sort of needed some of the capabilities that we offered, including UX work, including design work, including back-end work, including integration work. There's nothing, most large companies, different departments will typically sort of have different technology stacks, or they'll be trying to sort of they'll sort of under the covers adopt different things without telling IT, because they're really trying to get something done, and working with IT will take way too long. So they'll hire different agencies that bring in different technology stacks. Well, at some point these things need to talk to each other, right? They need to integrate. So we sort of specialize in sort of being able to come in and being able to provide this sort of integration layer between those different backends in support, right, of the thing they actually wanted to build, right? So a lot of times there was this pre-work that needed to happen, right, before, say, a marketing agency could be able to expose information, data sheets or whatever it is, product sheets or whatever it is that they wanted sort of exposed, to their own customers. There was some work that needed to be done there to sort of be able to allow sort of behind the scenes some things to click with each other in order to sort of expose that. So we by having worked in that environment for quite a long time, we started to develop this expertise of being able to work with a lot of different technology stacks and being able to sort of integrate things, and coming in and says, hey, we know you have these silos internally, as part of our sort of traditional agency sort of visual capability offerings, right? We also have strong engineering capability for people to come in and be able to connect these things together to help you reach your goals. So there's different ways you can sort of work sort of that stuff, but at the end of the day, if you're trying to make money, right, with these companies as an agency, you're not going to make money on one or two projects, right? It's going to be, especially if it's basically the relationship is new and you're trying to understand how you work with each other, what works best, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, when this particular customer, when they say A, they really mean B, right? That kind of stuff takes time, right? It's as much a people sort of matter as it is a technology one, right? So the best way to do that is to really establish relationships with these companies, establish partnerships that sort of give you an edge or a leg up when it comes to future work, and that's really the only way I've seen that you can make money sort of an ongoing basis in situations like these.
That is great advice. I want to segue into the technical side of our discussion today because,
Hmm.
well, I think that you have a lot of really good information to share. When I met you, you were one of the top players in the Ruby on Rails community in Boston. And I mean, you had so many, I mean, fans, I guess, for lack of a better word, but everybody in Boston who works in the industry knows you. I am curious, you've kind of made a transition away from that as being the core of your brand, and you've moved over to this newer language called Go. I I want to know. I want to start with Ruby, and we're going to get into Go as well. But what is Ruby good for, and what is Go good for, comparatively?
Well, at the risk of starting a language war on your show, um,
I
uh,
want to have a language war on my show, please.
well, I mean, I've done both, right? So it's for me, it's a matter of sort of being able to sort of use the right tool for the job. And I know for some it might sound like a cliche, but it's really at the end of the day. I mean, I've been in this industry for a long time. I've been in the business for nearly 20 years now, and I've used lots of different programming languages, lots of different technologies, lots of different stacks, frameworks. I mean, you name it. Especially with my agency experience, where walking into any company, they might have different things going on, be it Java, be it Scala, be it Ruby or Python, whatever it is, PHP, you name it. I sort of had to learn my way around it. With that sort of background, perhaps my view of sort of, I guess, I don't have fanaticism sort of going on with any one language or framework or stack, right? It's more about a lot of times it's about what any business needs, right? Or what sort of the right tool for the job is. I mean, to this day, I still use Ruby. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with Ruby. I will still use it when I'm throwing together a quick shell script here and there to do stuff, and I know Ruby's gonna be on the machine. If I need to share maybe a command line tool with my existing sort of Ruby community, I know that I can sort of deliver a script, and I know because my counterparts are gonna have Ruby installed. There's no problem there. It's and then I'll use Go for a completely different set of things, right? If I wanted to build sort of a cross-platform CLI tool, the Go tool chain is a lot better for that stuff, right? So it's all about
CLI,
sort of
command line interface.
command line interface, yeah. And I talk about command line because my sort of my career trajectory has sort of shifted from sort of traditional application sort of web sort of development to more ops and sort of backend and sort of systems programming these days. But again, it's gonna be what tool you want to use for the job at hand. I mean, Go might be great, but if I have to build a web app very quickly and put it out there to get feedback from customers as quickly as possible, Ruby on Rails is what I'm going to use, right? I wouldn't even have a second thought about using Go for that stuff because that is not Go's sweet spot, right? Yeah, there's going to be frameworks that people develop to make that easier, but Ruby and Rails, right? Rails being the killer app for Ruby, right? That has been honed to a T. That is the perfect sort of framework for getting something out there quickly and get validation, and get product market fit if you want to use that, right? So but when I need to do some heavy lifting, maybe maybe I'm building some sort of a large, queue, of workers to chop through a lot of data, right? I'm not going to use Ruby for that, because I know that's not where Ruby shines. So it's all about picking sort of the right tool for the job and really understanding, being able to say that, yeah, but really having enough experience to know, right, to be able to identify those situations where you can actually say, what, this is a job for Ruby, or what, this is a job for Python, or what, this is a job for Go, and this is a job for Scala. Like understanding sort of the factors that are sort of driving the decision you're going to make. And sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Sometimes you're going to walk into a company and they've adopted, they say, hey, Python for all the things, right? And you don't have a choice. You kind of have to, say, okay, I guess I'm going to have to sharpen up my Python skills, right? So it's being able to do that, having that understanding. That's what's going to drive a lot of the technology decisions you make.
That's really good to hear. I think that you sort of reinforcing this idea of Ruby as a prototyping language is, I mean, I think I would agree that Ruby on Rails is sort of the state of the art application prototyping tool as far as development velocity goes.
Hmm.
And what I hear every developer I know will say, "Oh, I use the tool that's right for the job," and
Yep.
I think about at least some percentage of the time, that's really just a way of saying, if I feel like learning a new language, I'm going to recommend that one on this project so I can like get some experience on this new language under my belt. And so I'm always
Right.
a little bit skeptical of it. When you say it, I know it's different because you've been there and you've used these for a long time. And Go is like an extremely performant language. And I think what you're doing, I mean, we're going to get into what you're doing a little bit more with Go. I'm
Hmm.
curious. I'm a Rubyist as well as learning some other languages. But I'm curious, what are your tips for someone who's coming from the Ruby community in terms of learning Go?
Oh man, I would say, I mean, and this applies not just to Ruby, but to any sort of programming language that you're comfortable with. Unless you've done sort of C in the past. I think if you're coming to Go, you kind of have to leave a lot of baggage at the door. Go is not like most other languages I've seen out there. It is. One can argue that Go is an object-oriented language, but you're not going to see sort of the same sort of a classical type sort of object orientation that you would, and say something like Ruby. So a concrete example might be, okay, well, I have a parent class and I have a child class that derives some functionality and behavior from the parent class. You might say, well, child extends from parent, right? In Go, you would be able to share that behavior, but you have to do it through composition as opposed to inheritance, right? The language doesn't give you the ability to try and go the classical inheritance route. You have to use composition to get to that behavior, that shared behavior, right? There's a strong pull towards using interfaces in Go, whereby in Ruby there's the same thing. This doesn't quite exist. That pull doesn't quite exist, right? So there's a different way of doing things, right? There's the Go way. I mean, back in my Ruby and Rails days, people would always talk about the Rails way, right? There's a certain way that you're going to use a piece of technology, be it a language or a framework that sort of ease your development workflow. And trying to do it another way, while it's possible to do it in some cases, it's possible to do it in a different way, but you're kind of you're gonna be swimming upstream a little bit. So Go is the same way in that sense, right? If you come in expecting, oh, I can do these magical, wonderful things in Ruby, how do I do the same thing in Go? Well, no, you kind of have to leave that at the door and learn to appreciate Go for what it is, and learn to sort of embrace its differences, and then you'll find over time that those what makes it different are also the things that make it strong, right? So there are some similarities at a very, very high level, but you have to appreciate the differences of Go, right? And maybe you can carry over some principles, some fundamental principles about software engineering that really don't change that much, from language to language, but you have to learn how to do it the Go way to really be productive in it, right? So and that's this advice I would give to anybody trying to learn Go. Like, don't go with the hype, and you're gonna find some, as with all languages out there, you're gonna find some people that say, oh yeah, Go is great, here's why I'm switching to it. And you're gonna find people, detractors, who say, well, nah, Go is not great because it doesn't have generics, or Go is not great because it doesn't allow me to do my favorite thing from language X, right? You're always gonna have these things, and that's okay, right? I think there's room in the industry for all of these technologies to coexist, right? But then if you're gonna come in and truly give Go a shot, you kind of have to leave that baggage at the door. And I did, and I'm glad I did, because I'm so productive in Go. It's incredible. I mean, once you appreciate it for what it is, you can get a lot done.
So let's say I am kind of embarking on this journey, or I'm interested in using Go. Maybe I'm, an intermediate Rails developer working at a startup, and I want to try out this new language because I hear it's performant. Maybe there are some opportunities in the architecture of my application to build out something. What kind of project might I start? Might be a good opportunity for me to learn Go. Like there must be some sort of archetypical
Mhm.
project that would be a good place to start.
Well, Go is very, very strong at building sort of networked applications, right? So, microservices, for example, I mean, if unless you've been under a rock for the last couple of years, have sort of taken over the world, right? It's the thing that most people are sort of talking about there as the new architectural style. If you discount the whole Lambda craze right now, but microservices are sort of a perfect fit for sort of marrying sort of introducing something new into your stack, right? Because by their nature, by their definition, they're supposed to be small, right? So the risk there that you're taking by introducing a microservice written in another language from what your stack is typically written in, right? In this case Go, because it's such a small component, right, of the entire of the sort of the bigger platform, you can take a risk of introducing that, right? And maybe you introduce that to do a particularly sort of gnarly sort of performance critical job, right? Something that's smaller that can take the burden away from perhaps maybe you're trying to use Ruby for something it's not meant for, or trying to use Python for something it's not meant for, and you're running into problems with the global interpreter locks within these languages. So using something like Go, whose concurrency model is so good. I mean, it's one of the sort of defining key features of the language, right? It's super awesome concurrency sort of mechanism. So being able to sort of leverage that, right, to do this work, to perform this job, at a fraction of the time it would take in these other languages, maybe that's a good way of introducing, right, a low risk, low barrier to entry sort of project into this world. And if if the business decides, or your tech lead or your architect decides, I just do not like Go into my framework because I have these reasons X, Y, and Z, whatever they may be, valid or not, right? They may decide, okay, we're not going the way of Go, we're going to do Scala instead, or whatever it is, right? At least you've developed something that is small enough that can be throwaway, right? That's one of the values, right, of a microservice. You can create something that you can throw away, right? But if you want to know sort of the one of the killer sort of like Ruby has Rails as sort of the killer app, killer implementation, using the language. Well, for Go, that might very well be Docker, right? Everybody out there knows Docker. That's all written in Go, right? Kubernetes, right? If you want to do sort of a Docker container orchestration, right? That's in large degree written in Go. So you have these sort of systems. Anytime you have sort of networked application requirements, sort of a heavy workload, you need to sort of maybe shell out to from Ruby or Python or these other languages. You want something performing behind the scenes to sort of handle some of that workload. Anytime you sort of writing APIs, backends for client-side applications, these types of applications are going to shine, and when you build them in Go, that the performance there versus something like Ruby or Python or these other languages is dramatic.
So, and I think by now we've all heard of microservices, and I think maybe I even kind of set that one up for you. But you did mention some new craze called Lambda, and I haven't even heard of this. So please just give me the primer.
So Lambda is sort of this new way. Serverless, I should say, is sort of the marketing name behind things like AWS Lambda and Google Cloud Functions and I think maybe it's Azure Functions or whatever it is. I mean, these companies. So the thing to note about these technologies and these companies is that when you're a cloud infrastructure provider like an AWS or a Google, with regards to Google Cloud, or Azure with Microsoft, and there are others out there as well. You once all of your offerings start looking sort of similar, right? All of you provide compute servers, all of you provide sort of a remote database as a service, and all of them provide sort of the same sort of fundamental components to building sort of modern day scalable applications. Then you need to start to sort of differentiate yourself in some way, right? So AWS was the first to come out with this whole serverless Lambda, using Lambda functions, right, as a way of sort of adopting the whole serverless architectural style. Serverless, and I use that term very loosely because it is mostly a marketing term, not really a technology term, because some server needs to actually run your code. You're not going to get away from having a server there, right, when you're dealing with the cloud. So if you say, well, the idea behind a serverless is that you don't have a server, right, virtual or otherwise. You don't have, not even a container, right, that you yourself as a developer or an ops person needs to sort of manage and maintain and patch and whatever it is, right? This is not a concern for you, the person who needs to deploy and run this particular application. But what serverless, I think, really the breakthrough there for me particularly is that it is forcing developers to think about sort of their architecture at a much lower level, right? Whereby, if you take microservices as sort of basically saying, hey, I want smaller components, right? And I want many of them, right? As opposed to building one giant monolithic application, right? I want microservices instead, right? And microservices is not necessarily a silver bullet for solving the kinds of problems you're going to have with the monolithic applications, but that's besides the point, right? If you keep going down this road saying, well, I have a monolithic application, or I have a monolithic application with components that work within it to sort of provide like functionality as a whole, and I have microservices right behind the scene. Perhaps the user makes a request. There's a gateway that receives the request, and then behind the scenes talks to a bunch of other microservices in order to assemble a response for the user, right? You keep going down that chain. Now Lambda, right, or serverless is sort of the next level down, right? It is something that is forcing you to think, even in at a smaller scope, right, of functionality. So rather than thinking, okay, well, I have a microservice that handles everything billing, right, and within your infrastructure. Now you have Lambda functions, right, that handle separate aspects of billing, right? Maybe you have, a credit card billing. That's one function, right? Maybe you have ACH, traditional, bank transfer billing, right? That's a separate function altogether. Maybe you have PayPal billing, right? That's a separate function altogether, right? Whereby traditionally you would sort of bundle these things up under, the whole that sort of billing as a whole. Now you're sort of breaking this thing apart even further, right? So you start to think about your infrastructure at a much lower unit. You're thinking about it as a functional unit, as opposed to a larger sort of capability encompassing sort of a component, right? And part of the large benefit of the Lambda is that, or rather I should say serverless, is that the cost implications of actually running a bunch of cloud functions is a lot less, right? It's a lot, you get a smaller bill, right, at the end of the day, because if these things aren't running, they're not incurring charges, right? So when I trigger an event, right, in my cloud infrastructure that forces a Lambda function to come into being and execute based on the incoming event data, right, and do something. Perhaps it's against charging a person's credit card. Once that operation is done and it exits, well, guess what? There's no other running server, right? So that means you basically paid for only that execution time, right? From when the event came in, you processed it, you charged the customer's credit card, and then that's it. It's over, right? There's no more billing. There's no running server. So the cost implications for actually having a serverless infrastructure are huge, right? Especially if you can have the type of infrastructure where things can actually operate that way. Now, it's not the silver bullet, that if you listen to sort of the marketing around this stuff, you'll think, oh my goodness, let me just go rebuild my entire infrastructure to be serverless. No, it's again, like all hype. You need to kind of go through the phase of saying, okay, there's a lot of excitement about this stuff, right? How can we actually use this in a meaningful way within a business, not throw away everything you already have, right? How can you sort of take a measured approach to saying, well, where would this technology work best within my existing infrastructure? And maybe traditional things that you would traditionally sort of drop in a container or put in a virtual machine somewhere. Maybe these things can be better served if you use a Lambda and serverless instead, as opposed to going the traditional route. So it's a new way of actually thinking about your technology infrastructure.
I love it. This is something I didn't recognize it when you said Lambda, but when you start talking about serverless, it's like, oh yeah, heard about this. So I want to ask a little bit more, for the Rails developers out there, because I have a feeling I'm going to have a few in the audience. Intermediate Rails developer. I've been doing this for 3 years, maybe full time.
Mm-hmm.
What were there any things that you started doing in your career that really, 10 or 20x your workflow, that
Mhm.
you wish you had learned years earlier?
Well, very specifically, I remember situations where the moment I started sort of looking past the magic, right? Diving a little deeper and getting a complete understanding of what sort of enabled some of these magical keywords, within the language and framework to sort of do what they did. It sort of it opened my eyes in a way that sort of that just using a framework, right, it doesn't do, right? It's almost like, I don't know if you ever went to the phase of actually using a WYSIWYG, right, to assemble your websites, right, whereby, there'll be editors out there that you could just basically, hey, you know what, let me just drag and drop a button here. Let me, click on this button and see the properties and, assign a link to it, whatever it is. You were kind of clicking and dragging and doing things. You were using sort of the visual aspect of this thing to assemble, your website or application or whatever it is. But then there was this behind the scene sort of world, like, of things being put together to actually, you in effect were using a level of abstraction on top of these things that you were telling yourself, or rather you knew they existed, you knew they were behind the scenes, but never, you weren't prepared to sort of dive into yet, right? But once you did, you're like, oh, okay, I see. When I drag this button onto the screen, this is the markup that gets generated. Or when I associate an on-click event to this link, or to this piece of text, this is the JavaScript that gets generated. It was the same thing for me with regards to Ruby and Rails, and again with Django and Python, and with any other framework or language I've come across, is that, okay, these frameworks are designed to speed up your developer workflow. They're not meant to replace your need, right, to understand how they work, right? So the moment it sort of dawned on me, okay, well, crap, this is underneath it all. It's just all Ruby, right? In the case of Rails, it's just all Ruby, right? It's just all Ruby code. I should be able to sort of navigate, the Rails code base, look at all the different gems that are involved in that, and understand what's going on. And once I did that, it sort of removed some of the. It was still magical, but it removed the mysticism out of it, right? I didn't have to say, oh man, like, I can't debug this. The moment your stack trace starts showing you things that are going to the sort of the Rails, related RB files, you're like, oh man, okay, I need to go back up. It must be me. I need to go back up and sort of fix my code, right? And 90% of the time, it would be my code, but every now and then, like, just understanding what the framework was doing underneath, because it's all Ruby code anyway, and because other people built it, and people are, sometimes they make mistakes, right? Or at least they have a way of thinking that if you try to basically understand and decompose how they see, the sort of framework handling a particular kind of request, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I see how I need to do this, right? So for me, it was like, okay, there's active record, which is magical, right? You can just, say, hey, find me this thing by an ID or by some sort of, field name, whatever it is, and it went and did it. And then I'm like, okay, well, how does SQL actually work, right? Because at the end of the day, this thing is generating SQL and has to talk to a database, right? What is the SQL that's actually sending, right? And in the cases where it doesn't produce very efficient SQL, right? Like, you need to be able to understand what that SQL is, right? You need to be able to understand what part of the framework is actually generating that way, and for you to be able to fix your code, but also understand how is it that this framework is actually putting this piece of SQL together that goes to the database to fetch my data, right? So understanding how SQL itself worked, understanding how databases work, understanding how HTTP, the fundamental sort of building block of the web, right? Understanding how that works, right? I mean, if you've never gone on the command line and issued curl statements as a developer, you need to actually drop what you're doing right now and go to the command line and start issuing curl. Like, try to query Google, right, from your command line using curl. I mean, it's a completely different world. It just opens your eyes to sort of the fundamental sort of how the web works, right? You kind of have to understand that. You kind of have to pierce through that veil as a developer if you're really trying to grow beyond a language, beyond a framework, or beyond the thing that everybody is, sort of mad about today, right? Because, once you have that fundamental understanding of how things work, it becomes a matter of just putting things together, right? It becomes a matter of understanding how you solve problems, right? And not every problem is going to come to you in the form of an active record query, right? Not every problem is going to come to you in the form of, oh, how do I localize this application? Oh yeah, let me reach out for Rails' built-in capabilities for doing that, right? Not every problem is going to come to you that way. But if you understand how things are put together, if you understand the fundamental building blocks, right? If you understand that Rails at the end of the day needs to issue HTTP requests to get something back from the server, that opens your eyes to a whole new set of possibilities.
Yeah, I think that there's something good for the soul almost when you when the first time you edit like a gem that you're using because it's broken or not quite doing what you want it to do. That's like a life-changing moment. And you're talking about these curl commands from I remember you are the guy who checks his email from his terminal, right?
Yeah, I do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's also there's something about the learning curve here. Like I remember when I was 12 years old using, I think it was Front Page at that point, like the Microsoft version of Dreamweaver or the Adobe version of Dreamweaver. No, it was the Microsoft version of Dreamweaver.
That was Microsoft, yeah.
Yeah, Front Page back in the day, and you don't really know what's going on, and then eventually you learn like HTML and CSS, and you're doing everything from scratch. But then, a few years ago, Foundation and Bootstrap became a thing, and then it's funny because you go from like this high level of abstraction to low levels of abstraction. Then you get like Foundation and Bootstrap, and now it's funny because I'm right back at a WYSIWYG now. It just exports code because it's like, well, I understand the underlying HTML and CSS, but I can, as long as I can export the code now, I can design something 10 times as quickly. And it's like the simplicity on the other side of complexity that you have to go through that whole process to learn. That's really awesome. And it's not just good for your workflow, but it feels good. It really feels good the first time you learn the underlying properties of something.
Absolutely. Just, again, it removes the mysticism out of it, right? It makes you feel like, okay, I really understand this stuff. I am an engineer. That's what I do. I get to understand how things work. I break them apart so I can put them back together, right? It's the same exact thing.
So do you have any other... I was especially curious about like command line hacks because you when I see you hacking on the command line, dude, you've got like a Vim terminal with like 5 panels, and I'm like, what is happening here? What is he doing? And I feel like you might not even be able to explain like half of it because it's just built up over time. But tell me about is there anything in particular that sticks out as being when I first wrote this alias, it was like the biggest time.
Well, it's I think I kind of fell in love with the command line because it was, I don't know, in some way it was a pure sort of experience of dealing with the operating system, right? Like I think I used to work on the Windows machines way back in the day, and then in pretty much everything, if you need to do anything in Windows, there's typically some sort of dialog box or some sort of windows with lots of buttons and radio buttons and things in it to get things done. But then I remember, I was working on this particular project where I had to sort of do it headless mode, right? I didn't have. This is something that was going to happen on the server side. This is something that was sort of unattended, right? A user would, issue a request, and then behind the scenes, I had to sort of trigger this process that was going to compile together like a Swift, right? Basically, run a Flash program to compile, ingest some data and push out a Swift object for me, a Swift movie, as it's called. I'm sort of dating myself here. I'm not sure if Flash is being used so much these days, but other than maybe building games. But back in the day,
I think it's illegal now.
But back in the day, when Flash was the ish, it was like that if you wanted sort of any sort of rich user experience. There was a point we used to call them rich internet applications, RIAs. If you wanted that sort of experience, right? And this is when JavaScript was sort of coming into its own for that particular kind of purpose beyond just the DHTML days. I'm not sure if your audience is even going to know, even aware of these days, but back in the day when JavaScript was sort of becoming, oh, this is nice, you can make things move on the screen or whatever it is. We used to call these things DHTML, right? So, but using Flash to produce Swift, right, it was a better user experience than what HTML could provide you, right? Plus, you got to interact with data. You could use ActionScript to communicate, with the file system, or to there was libraries in there to communicate with the external services. I mean, it was awesome back then, right? So, I needed to sort of produce this sort of unattended process, this unattended workflow, right? That would be triggered by a user taking some action on a front end somewhere, right? So at that point, I'm like, oh man, like how am I going to do this, right? Typically, a developer or a UX, engineer, whatever it is, would open up, the Flash application, put in, a few things or hit publish or whatever it is, and out would come out a Swift, right? But then, after some research, I found, okay, well, there are other tools out there that could actually work with the Flash format. They could produce Swift. I could inject data. So I started stitching together, right, this solution that basically worked without having to have the Flash IDE, right, to do this work. So I started stitching these things together, and at the end of the day, I was able to produce a Swift movie, right, completely on the server side without anybody having to have a hand on it. So at that point, I'm like, okay, this is awesome, right? This is awesome. All I need to do is create some sort of a script that's going to run on the server that needs to somehow initiate, right? Needs to somehow trigger, right? And then with these commands in there, with the right flags, passing in the right parameters to these different tools, piping one output as input into another program. I was like, my mind was blown. I'm like, this is like awesome, all right? And then I knew, okay, this is, at least at a higher level, I knew that this is how, the Unix and Linux world sort of operates. It's all about, stitching together tools, piping together output from one program into another, and slicing and dicing sort of the standard in and standard out, and sort of being able to sort of, come to something that on their own, any one of these programs wouldn't be able to do, but together they work together to create something new, right? To produce something new. And from that point on, I went and got myself a Linux machine, or rather, I installed Ubuntu right on my existing Windows machine and started using Ubuntu like exclusively. Right, I couldn't get access to my a lot of the applications I was used to back in the Windows days, but I found equivalents right on the Linux world for these things, and it took some getting used to. But once I sort of understood sort of the general philosophy, right, of Unix and Linux, sort of being able to have these small tools working together to produce something, then I was hooked. I was like, okay, I'm doing everything on the command line. If I could browse the entire web on the command line, I would. I mean, you can use it. You can do that with links, as like a command line browser, but it's not the greatest experience, and you don't want to sort of be dogmatic about that stuff. But it's for me like being on the command line and not having to sort of context switch to different, GUIs and whatnot is a joy. And that's one of the reasons why I really like Vim as an text editor for pretty much all the programming work I do. Again, are there better tools for, editing Ruby or editing, Java code or editing Go code? Yeah, there are some editors out there. There are some IDEs, I would say. But at the end of the day, being able to sort of go on the command line and use Vim or use curl and all the command line tools I have at my disposal. Being able to I use a Mac these days, so being able to do a brew install whatever package I care about, or being able to do a Docker pull on some sort of package and being able to Docker run it. I mean, these things are with GUIs, right? You have to kind of look around and see which one works best for you, and does it have all the features? Because these things themselves, they use the underlying capabilities that you have access, like albeit in a sort of a raw format, right, on the command line, but they use the same sort of capabilities. So I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I'm gonna go to the source. I'm gonna go use these tools directly because to me that's fun, right?
I feel like I would pay for a course that taught me how to do iOS development without Xcode, if it's even possible.
Well, I mean, I think these days with Swift, I think. Well, I don't know if you can. I mean, I don't build sort of mobile apps with these sort of modern tools, but I think there's even like a server side way of actually running Swift code.
Oh, there
So
is, there is,
right,
because
I think there is.
I've got a company that I was working with that wrote an entire Swift application that essentially was, so basically what they were trying to do is they were trying to speed up like iOS applications. And so what they would do is, I guess that the basic like networking libraries in iOS are a little bit intensive. Like there's a lot of like headers and stuff that you don't really need. And so
Hmm.
what they would do is they would just strip all that out, send that to their like Swift application on a server somewhere that would then like reconstruct an HTTP protocol and then like complete the transaction. And they were able to like quadruple upload and download speeds from applications doing
Mm.
this. And they're still around. It's called Caffeine, so it's a really
Mm.
interesting project that they're working on. And that was the first time that I learned about Swift on the server. I want to ask you about some non-technical hacks that maybe you know about.
Hmm.
Are there any life hacks that you want to share with us, maybe for non-developers?
Well, I think the sort of the ultimate life hack I'm working on right now, and this is something I started within the last month, and I think it's starting to work. But I mean, it's working for me, and I don't know if that's going to work for your audience, but at least I'm going to put it out there and see if it works for them. But I do Pomodoro, and that doesn't, that works for both non-technical and technical people, right? You don't have to be a developer to do this, and you don't have to not be a developer to do this, right? But I do Pomodoro, and sort of the, if you don't know what Pomodoro is, you can do a quick Google search for Pomodoro. But using that technique of I use it with a twist, right? So the Pomodoro technique, in a nutshell, is basically you spend 25 minutes, you identify a task, you spend 25 minutes working on it, you take a 5-minute break, and then you start another 25-minute timer. After the fourth time you do that, you take a 15-minute break, and then you start over again, right? And then basically after each 25-minute sort of cycle, you put a check mark on a piece of paper somewhere, or you track it, however you want to, and then on the fourth time, right, you take that 15-minute break. So what I've started doing, because I work from home pretty much every day, and oftentimes, by the time my wife gets home, and by the time I cook dinner for the kids and get everybody, bath time, all that stuff, like life things, right? By the time I get through all of that, I'm like, oh man, I wish I could have made that class at the gym, or now I'm so tired that I don't feel like going to the gym. I don't feel like doing any physical activity and whatnot. So I try, basically I'm working on a regimen to sort of defeat that. And the way I do that is during the 5-minute break, right, in between my each of my pomodoros, I actually do physical exercise, right? So I have a 5-minute window, right, to squeeze in as many push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and other activities that I can, right, within that 5-minute time span, right? And I've turned into a game whereby I'm always trying to beat sort of the last iteration, right? If I got 10 push-ups done, and 5 pull-ups and 30 sit-ups, I'll try to sort of outdo myself from the previous sort of iteration. So I find that within a day, right, I would have done 300 push-ups or something, and like over 500 sit-ups, and I would have clocked in like 25, 30 pull-ups. By saying, what, in between my pomodoros, I'm actually going to do some physical activity, right? And then to sort of, and that removes, and by the end of the day, like I've gotten in like a serious workout, right? But I didn't have to sort of pack it all in into 1 hour or an hour and a half, whatever it is, of going to the gym at the end of the day. Like I was able to sort of spread it out throughout the day. And that's kind of working for me. Again, I don't know if that works for other people, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician. I'm not going to tell you, hey, you should do this, like don't hurt yourself, but that's what's working for me right now.
That is awesome, and I'm definitely going to try that because I've been having a similar sort of issue. You've got a couple of children, and
Three to be precise.
3 children. Yeah, you have 3 children now. I've
Yeah.
met the two oldest ones, I believe. I don't
Right.
think I've ever met the
Right.
youngest.
Yep.
And I don't have any kids, but I've got a lot of young family members. I've done my fair share of babysitting. I'm curious, do you have any child rearing hacks that you'd share with the audience?
Oh man. Well, the thing is, children are so different from each other. I mean, even within my own family, it's amazing how each of my kids sort of displays completely different sort of ways of thinking and ways of being. Like when my second came into being, I'm like, okay, this child has a mind of her own. She's completely different from my first child. And then the same thing again happened, with the third one. I'm like, okay, these kids are their own being, right? For some reason, as parents, you think that, well, yeah, they're kind of gonna be, they will like the same things. They will sort of, follow the same behavior pattern. Well, not always, right? So because of that, the thing that works for one is not always gonna work for the other. But that said, what I find that is working right now, in the ages of my kids, obviously this is gonna vary from age to age too as well, right? So what I find is working for my kids right now. My oldest is 11, my middle one is 5, and my last one just turned 4 recently. So what I find is working, like for them is sort of reinforce when they do something that my wife and I find to be desirable, right? When they perform well in school, or they take a leap of faith, right? They sort of surmount or something that they were scared of doing, right? The other day, my kids were sort of jumping off a ledge, into daddy's arms, right? The youngest one was really, really scared for doing that, right? 4-year-old jumping off a ledge, even though dad's like right there waiting for her, she like really sort of had to work hard to overcome that fear. But then when she overcame it, then the way we sort of reward that is by saying, hey, you worked really hard at that, right? Or when my 11-year-old comes home and says, hey, look, daddy, I boosted my percentage score, my grade, by 2%, right? And then she comes every week, she's telling, hey, I boosted it. Like, I reward her not by giving her things or buying her things or saying, hey, you're smart or whatever it is. Like, I reward her by saying, hey, I'm glad that you are working hard at this, right? It's reinforcing that hard work, right, pays off, because it is, right? It's a lot of times. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see people saying, hey, oh yeah, you're smart, right? You this, you that. But I'm like, no, stop reinforcing like things like innate qualities or whatever it is, right? I mean, I've seen tons of people squander sort of the innate abilities, right? But I've never seen somebody who works hard not reach their goals, right? So that's what I try to do, is instill in my kids sort of a work ethic, and sort of, hey, working hard gets you right to the things that you want to accomplish in life, right? So just keep working hard, and even if you fail, right, it's not because you didn't work hard, right? Even if you fail, even if you didn't make meet the goal or achieve certain result, it's not because you didn't work hard. Hard work pays off, and worth having in this life, is gonna be, you're gonna have to earn. You're gonna have to work for. Nothing worth having is given. You have to work for it.
I love it. I love it so much. Reward your children with praise of hard work. My
Yeah.
last, I want to give you these last, few minutes to talk about your current position, any lessons that you've pulled out of, your current role, any challenges you're currently facing. Talk to me about what you're doing right now.
Right now, I am working for this nonprofit, Achievement Network. I mean, man, it's like when I think about the journey that led me to that organization, it's almost unreal. It's basically what they do is they go into sort of underserved communities, and effectively, especially like school districts, throughout the country that sort of struggle to meet maybe standardized testing goals or educate, like some sort of educational goal, right? But the idea being that obviously not the educational level, right? The quality of education is not the same across different districts, school districts or states or counties. So what they do is they target the communities, the districts that sort of tend to struggle, right, with regards to sort of maintaining and keeping sort of high achievement standards for their students, and work with them through coaching and through use of technology, right, to help these schools sort of meet the sort of the minimum performance requirements and exceed it in a lot of ways, right? So to me, like I'm a big sort of proponent of sort of education and using that as a tool to sort of alleviate poverty and sort of really expose children to a world that they otherwise might not even think they could even reach, right? So that's why I'm involved in things like Rails Bridge and Go Bridge, which you're familiar with. But my this is an organization that sort of aligns, their principle sort of aligns with sort of what I want to do, right, in terms of sort of being able to give back to the community. Like I said before, I've been in this business for nearly 20 years, and as a black man, when I show up to technology meetups or to conferences, there are usually not many of people who look like me around, right? So working towards sort of bringing diversity into the tech industry, not for the sake of diversity, but really for sort of exposure, right, on both sides, right? Being able to expose people of color and minorities, right, underserved communities to this wonderful world of technology, and vice versa, right? Bringing in new ideas, new ways of thinking, right? It's been proven over and over that having diversity in a team or at a company actually is good for business, right? So this is sort of a mutually beneficial thing. So working at this organization is just one way of me being able to sort of say, you know what? This organization is about sort of helping to bring education equity, right, to the neighborhoods that sort of need it most. And I'm about bringing education, exposing technology education to underserved communities and those that need it most. So it was sort of a perfect fit in terms of sort of alignment there, But from a technical standpoint, what I do day to day is I'm doing a lot of ops stuff. I mentioned earlier that I don't do a whole lot of sort of application development these days. I'm doing a lot of ops stuff, so pretty much I'm managing infrastructure, using sort of some of the latest buzzwords, like Docker and container orchestration and doing DevOps and a lot of that stuff. So I'm loving it. It's amazing. Like I had to go to a nonprofit organization to get to use all these wonderful cool things, but that's it's a wonderful organization that's sort of forward looking, especially with technology, and if you come in with ideas of how to make things better, they're very open to that. So I'm really, really happy where I'm at right now. I'm glad about what the organization does, and I'm really glad about what I do. But from a challenge standpoint, it's the same thing as has always been for me. It's people, right? There's always going to be, like, wherever you go, whatever company you work for, whatever team you work on, people, right, are going to be different, right? People are going to have different needs across a broad spectrum, right, of whatever company you work at. They're going to have different needs, right? So understanding how to relate to people, being able to sort of understand what a person or a team might be going through, because of reason X, Y, and Z, sort of having empathy or being able to sort of pair with another developer to help them get through something. In my case, we have quite a number of juniors on the team, so any opportunity that I get to sort of pair over a Google Hangout or something, sort of these things sort of help you make your other teammates better, right? So, and there's always these types of challenges around. It's easy to just silo myself, especially working from home where I'm not in the office, where I'm coming into sort of physical contact with these people. It's easy to silo myself off and say, you know what, I'm going to check in my code, or I'm going to do what I do, and like I'll hit you up on Slack every once in a while. It's easy to do that, right? But I find that it's most rewarding by engaging people and using technology, right, to sort of enable that, right? Again, Hangouts or pairing up, online, doing whatever they happen to be working on, need assistance with, as long as I can help, right? So some of my team members work on Angular, front-end applications. I don't know anything about that. I'm more of a back-end kind of guy, but sometimes it's just a matter of being able to having them use you as a sounding board, right? So, I've helped solve client-side issues without actually having to code any client-side, right? Again, helping somebody walk through or think through something and just being available, being there for them. I find that to be hugely rewarding. So, again, the challenge is people, but you kind of have to challenge yourself as well to sort of step out of your own comfort zone and go meet people halfway.
I love it. Johnny, when I met you, you've always struck me as someone who's extremely community oriented and constantly giving back and really going above and beyond in a lot of cases. I mean, personally, I've benefited from your expertise more times than I can count. So you're just someone who really does contribute a lot to the community. Where can my listeners find you? And do you have any, last ask for my audience, anything that you want them to take with them as they go about their day?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. First name, last name, J Boursiquot, JBoursiquot. So just reach out there. I'm definitely willing to engage with folks about anything they'd like to engage on. But a call to action for your audience, man, it's When I think about the current climate around the country, it just feels heavy, you know. It just feels like people are sort of divided, and I mean, I don't care which side of the sort of the political fence you fall on, but you know, we can all agree that the country right now needs some healing, right? It needs some sort of bringing together. So, and that starts, I think that starts with sort of protecting, having people that sort of help protect individual sort of rights and individual sort of ability to pursue happiness, right? And I think for me, one of your organizations that sort of embody that is the ACLU. So I'd say that, you know, if you have it in you to donate to that organization, they're a nonprofit whose entire job is to sort of, you know, litigate and sort of fight sort of injustice wherever, you know, it shows up, you know, that basically anything that strips, you know, individuals' rights away. That organization is, I think, you know, is definitely worth your money. If there ever was a time where you can sort of really sort of put your money where your mouth is and really sort of support an organization that's gonna sort of do the right thing, right? Especially within this climate, I think donating to the ACLU now would be sort of a good way to go. So that's my call to action for your audience.
Thank you so much, Johnny. And the ACLU really is on the cutting edge as far as some of these mission-driven organizations go. So let's support them in their mission. Johnny Boursiquot, everybody, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hello, one more thing before you go. If you enjoyed today's episode of Hacker Practice with Johnny, please hit that subscribe button wherever you are listening to the show. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes. Those reviews help us climb the charts so that more people will find these wonderful little discussions and listen to them and enjoy and learn from them. And finally, if you have any feedback for us, critical or otherwise, please go to hackerpractice.com and fill out the form on the page. We love hearing from you. I read them all personally, and I will respond to as many as I can. So, that is leaving some feedback on the homepage, that's hackerpractice.com, leaving us a review on iTunes so that we'll climb those charts, and hitting that subscribe button. Please, please, please hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed today's episode. In any case, we hope you did enjoy the episode, and we hope you come back next time for Hacker Practice. My name is Justice Epen, and I'll see you next time.